Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Marquette, and we're so glad you're with us on a special day to stay curious. I have beside me Mr. W.O. Brown. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hey, Mark.
Good to see you, sir.
Thank you.
You were born June 12th, I think you said?
June 12th, 1923.
1923, so he's 100 years old in a couple of weeks.
Passed.
Yeah, passed, and you're doing great. Been a friend of the museum many years.
Right.
And met you 4 years ago at our Apollo 50th anniversary of Apollo 11 and all, and been dying to get you on the show. I lost your number. So glad you're around. You're going to hear some amazing stories when I shut up, of course, with Mr. Brown here. We're going to talk a little bit about being a centenarian and some of the people he's also born in 1923. And then talk about your career with the Juno rocket. You were a systems engineer for Chrysler, very important part of our Apollo program.
Right.
And you're a highly decorated World War II hero. And we're going to hear about Wernher von Braun and all kinds of stuff. So call up your friends and say, get on Stay Curious. Okay. On our green screen behind us here, we have our control room, our Cape Canaveral control room. That looks pretty cool, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And a very familiar sight to you, isn't it?
Memories.
Well, first tell us a little bit about where you grew up, where you were born. First, I want to get out there. W.O. You've been called that all your life, you told me.
Right.
Because?
My dad was called W.O., so I was W.O. Jr. So.
Okay, and that's William Osband, you told me. Osborne, okay. All right, well, we got an Ozzy Osband, that's right, Osborne. Well, tell us a little about where you grew up, what that was like 100 years ago.
Well, they tell me I was born in Hull, Georgia, a small town, right? I couldn't call it a town. There was a combination of filling station, convenience store, and 4 houses when my mother took me back there some years later. My dad was a Baptist minister, and we moved around quite a lot. I lived first years of my life in Florida and South Georgia, and moved to Macon, Georgia, when I was in the 7th grade of grammar school. My dad had been a very good friend of the president of Mercer University, and he had offered my mother the job of managing the Mercer University bookstore. So we moved, when I was in the 7th grade of grammar school, we moved to Macon, Georgia, and I lived the rest of my younger days in Macon, Georgia, until I went into the service, and then even then, after I came back to the service and finished up at Mercer, my folks lived in Macon. So.
Home of the rock group, the Allman Brothers.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know aware of that or not.
Oh, absolutely. One of the Allman Brothers was a Mercer University student, so yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about how you got into this space world, though. But, we're fascinated, of course, with you. Who else is 100 years old right now? Well, would you believe Henry Kissinger is 100 years old? You said you saw an interview with him.
Saw him on television. Looked pretty good.
Yeah, well, you look great yourself. And you have great eyesight, you can tell. And Bob Barker, game show host and animal activist, is 100 years old. British actress Glynis Johns and a character actor Mike Nussbaum. If you saw his face, you'd recognize him in all kinds of things. But we put this up here, just a little nostalgia to remind everybody. There's your cost of living. In 1924, all right.
That's why they call it the good old days.
Exactly. Boy, what strikes me is tuition to Harvard, $250 a year? Sign me up.
Excuse me, my tuition to Mercer University when I started in 1940 was $100 a quarter, but I was a preacher's son, so I got a $25 discount. My tuition was $75 a quarter in 1940.
Wow. That's interesting. There you see the things. Postage stamp 2 cents is now 68 cents. I found this interesting, W.O. The life expectancy in the year you were born was men 56 years and women 58 years. You beat them.
I beat them.
By a bunch. You almost doubled it. I hope you do double it, WL. But you know, today it's almost 20 years more.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
I think it's about 76 and 78, something like that for men and women.
Right.
And you've seen these changes come about from polio. Polio used to be a horrible thing, right?
Absolutely. It was a
You never had
devastating
polio.
disease. Devastating.
Yeah. Anything strike you as we're rolling back here, the peeling back 100 years, what is most astounding to you?
Well, primarily the advances in medicine. That's been probably the most amazing thing that's happened in the past 100 years. And that's the reason for the increase in the life expectancy. And well, that's really the reason why I'm here today, because of the advances in medical and treating of disease. Right now, I'm in the, let's see, 2.5 years into a 6-month terminal illness.
Oh, is that right? God bless you, really. Okay. Well, we're so glad you're here to tell your story, and we'll get to that in a minute. I wanted to just mention that the first production of the balloon tire was 100 years ago by Firestone. Would you believe the 1923 and 2023 calendars are identical?
Yeah.
All right, exactly pan out the same days of the year and so forth. Marty Winkle is our co-producer and running our Streamlabs board there, and he worked on the lunar module. I told you, you've talked to Marty, he brought you over
Right.
here. We're so proud of that. And he's got a question on our UCAC family microphone there, Marty.
Yeah, it's my question. W.O., did you get a birthday card from the president when you turned 100?
No, and I was disappointed. If Trump had been in, I would have gotten a card.
Now, hold on. We don't talk politics, sex, or religion here, WWO. But, okay. We hear you there. We hear you. Well, okay. And I remember it was a big deal on Today's Show to have you on a Smucker's jar.
Yeah.
That was, who was that? The guy that did that. But at any rate, a couple other things 100 years ago, $1 in 1923. Today, the inflation is
$16
and 50 cents.
and 50 cents.
Yeah, so
Unbelievable.
you could buy $16 worth of goods in 1923 with $1. That would be that and a tip is a good meal at a restaurant.
Absolutely.
So, popular boys' names were Robert, John, and James, and Mary, Helen, and Dorothy were popular names in the 23 on there. So I think that's interesting that you took your dad's sort of nickname W.O.
Right.
on there. You mentioned to me you've got 2 sons, 8 grandchildren, and 11 great-grandchildren.
Right.
Any of them called W.O.?
No, but one of my great-granddaughters is named after my sister and my daughter, and she's Josie Leslie Brown.
Okay. We didn't ask you if you grew up in a big family. How many kids were there?
Only 2, myself and my sister.
Okay. A couple other people born in 1923 that you would know that have passed on. Charlton Heston, one of my favorite actors.
Yeah.
Ted Knight, of course, of Mary Tyler Moore Show and Caddyshack. You gotta love Ted Knight and Caddyshack. Actor, director Richard Attenborough. Everyone knows the soprano Maria Callas.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Artist Roy Lichtenstein. I'll bet Chris Callie knows Roy Lichtenstein. And Johnny Carson's sidekick, Ed McMahon. TV producer Aaron Spelling. He did all kinds of TV shows. And country singer Hank Williams shares your birth year. But, of course, our favorite has to be Alan Shepard, would have been 100 years old today. Did you ever get a chance to meet Mr. Shepard?
Never did. Never did.
You worked on his Redstone rocket? That was Army. You didn't, did you? Or did you?
Yeah. Chrysler had the contract for the Redstone Arsenal rocket from Redstone Arsenal, and then they also had the contract for the Jupiter rockets from the Redstone Arsenal.
Well, I wanted to tell you first to tell us a little bit about your service to our country in World War II. What service were you in?
Well, when the draft age was lowered from 21 to 18, I was 19 years old.
Oh gosh.
I went down to the courthouse in Macon, Georgia, and registered for the draft, walked out from the courthouse, put a nickel in the bus, and rode out to Conklin Field and enlisted in the Army Air Corps. I had 3 uncles who were drafted, and they had said, whatever you do, don't get drafted. Go somewhere, Navy, anything except the Army, because you'll be in the infantry, and that is no life. So I enlisted in the Army Air Corps. Had a tough time passing the physical. I was 6 feet 1 3/4 inches tall and weighed 129 pounds.
Holy cow, string bean.
When I turned sideways, you lost me.
Yeah.
But I finally passed the physical, went in for the interview with the sergeant who was the recruiter. And he said, now let's see, you're a junior at Mercer University. When are you going to graduate? I said, well, it'll be a year and a half. He said, well, let's see. We'll put you, I'll tell you what, we'll give you 45 days to get your affairs in order, and we'll call you to active duty at that time. So we shook hands, and I said, thank you very much. Went home. 3 months later, got a telegram saying, report to Biloxi, Mississippi for boot camp. So much for my education being a greater value.
Right. Well, that was 1942, 43, so very, very active war going on.
Yeah, in March of 43, I went to Biloxi, Mississippi. I don't know whether anybody in your audience has ever seen the movie Biloxi Blues, but it was a very true depiction of boot camp in the Army. They called 5,000 of the reservists to active duty on the same day.
Wow.
When we got to Biloxi, Mississippi, there was no barracks for us. There were only tar paper shacks. The latrine was a tar paper shack, and the barracks were tar paper shacks with cots placed about a foot and a half apart all the way up and down the thing. I had ROTC at Lanier High School for Boys, so when they issued us a mess kit, because there were no mess facilities for us, they were going to feed us from trucks. The mess kit was a World War I mess kit. It was covered with aluminum oxide. My ROTC training kicked in, and I took sand and scrubbed that aluminum oxide off of my mess kit. Those who did not do that, aluminum oxide can be a diarrhea.
Oh, wow.
That was some fun for the people who were with my group. But everything worked out all right. We did the boot camp, and then went to college training detachment in Springfield, Missouri, Southwest Missouri State Teachers College in Springfield, Missouri. And so we were supposed to have ground school and 10 hours in a Piper Cub. The second week we were there, I got tapped on the shoulder, pulled out of ground school, and said, you're now the physics lab instructor. So I didn't get any ground school. Yeah. I did get my 10 hours in the Piper Cub and did real well up until about the 6th hour when we went into stalls and spins. The first couple of times I did all right, took the Piper Cub up and stood it on its tail, waited till it dropped down, recovered the spin. The third time we went up, barf. And I said to myself, I will never make pilot training. I cannot do that if I have to do aerial maneuvers, loops and spins and stalls. So I'm going to go for navigators. When I got to classification school, I said, I would not like to try for pilot. I want to try for navigator. They said, well, navigator is a pretty hard course. We don't have many people qualify, but if you want to take the test, you can do it. So I took the test, and I qualified navigator. But there were no openings in navigation pre-flight. So they said, until there's an opening, you'll be on KP. So at Randolph Field, I spent almost a month on KP. And you talk about, oh man, that is tough duty.
Is it? Holy cow.
Excuse me. But finally, there was an opening at Ellington Field for pre-flight, so I took my pre-flight training at Ellington Field.
Oh, well, you're a highly decorated World War II veteran, and not just World War II veteran. We're talking here with W.O. Brown. Talk about national treasures, as we call our space workers. You truly are one, Mr. Brown, as we get into your space history. But tell us about some of the accommodations you got for service to our country.
Well, I was assigned to a weather reconnaissance squadron. I was a navigator on a B-24. And
B-24.
And we had first gone through crew training in Casper, Wyoming. And my co-pilot was married, so he was able to live off base at Casper, Wyoming in crew training. So he was in a duplex with the lead navigator for crew training at Casper. And so at the end of crew training, when most of the people who were at Casper at that time were sent to Italy, and at least 30% of the crews that went to Italy were shot down on the Palazzi oil field raids. But we were sent to Oklahoma City and became a mapping aircraft. So I have mapped the entire state of Texas from 20,000 feet.
Wow.
B-24. We had 3 cameras mounted in the bomb bay, one pointed straight down and one on the left, one on the right at 20-degree angles. And we would fly up from starting at the southern border of Texas all the way up to the northern border of Texas, and then over another overlapping. And so I have mapped the entire state of Texas from 20,000 feet, and it's bitter cold at 20,000 feet.
1944, that time frame, right? You're talking about. So you stayed, did you go overseas?
Yeah, at the end of our mapping training, we were slated to go overseas, and the P-38 became operational. The P-38 could fly faster and higher.
That's the Mustang?
No, the Lightning.
Oh, the Lightning, okay.
And so they became the photo recon people for the Army Air Corps, and so we lost our photographer and picked up a meteorologist, and we became the weather recon.
Oh, wow.
So we flew weather recon as typhoon trackers for the first 4 months that I was overseas in March of '44. We flew weather recon tracking typhoons out of Guam. We'd fly 6 hours to the east, plotting wind directions and velocities, and then flying 6 hours back. Our B-24M had been specially modified so that it contained 3,600 gallons of aviation fuel, and we could fly for 14 hours.
Wow.
So the normal mission was 6 hours out to the east and then 6 hours back, reporting wind direction and velocities and all the meteorological items. So all of a sudden the first typhoon popped up. So we were the second aircraft to fly into the typhoons, and our squadron commander was a West Point meteorologist, and he had determined that the only way the B-24 could survive in a typhoon was to go in under the thunderstorms, which meant that we had to go in between 600 and 200 feet. And we had to fly in all 4 quadrants of the typhoon, plotting wind vectors for direction and velocity. And when you dropped a perpendicular to each of those wind vectors, they would intersect at the exact center of the typhoon. So we would report the exact center. The second typhoon mission we flew, we came back to Central Field in Guam. And there was a Jeep waiting with 2 air police, and they said, "Who's the navigator?" Everybody pointed at me. They said, "Get your logs and come with me." So I loaded in the back of the Jeep and went down to 20th Air Force headquarters, walked into 20th Air Force headquarters, and there was Major General Curtis E. LeMay sitting in his office with a cigar stuck in his mouth. And sitting about 10 feet away from his desk was his navigator, a major, and he said, "Let me see your log." So I said, "Okay, here it is." And I started this log over truck, so I know it is accurate because truck is a physical place, and everybody knows where truck was, the truck atoll was. So he went through every line of my log, and he said, "This looks correct." This was the first time people had ever seen a tropical storm that remained stationary. It had only moved 6 miles. The center had only moved 6 miles from the previous flight. So he said, "Okay, this gives us another extra day to prepare for the typhoon." So we did 20 missions.
Fascinating.
We did 20 missions out of Guam, and then we got rest and recuperation in Hawaii. So we went to Hawaii, and down we were staying in a hotel on Waikiki Beach, and just down the street from the hotel was a ice cream shop called Brown's Ice Cream Shop. I said, "I have found a home."
Yeah.
I spent most of that week at Brown's Ice Cream Shop. We got ready to go back to Guam, and there was a flu outbreak, so we got another week staying. And we went over, and there was an island in the middle of Kaneohe Bay that had been the home of Chris Paul, who was the founder and CEO of Chris Craft Boats.
Oh, wow.
And he had a four-masted schooner called the Seth Parker parked, and a couple of his Chris Craft speedboats on the island. So we had an extra week there. And that was the first time I had seen any fresh food. They had relocated the Pan Am Midway Hydroponic Station to that island in Kaneohe Bay, and they were growing 12-foot-tall tomatoes in hydroponics.
Really? And this is 1940s.
Yeah.
Hydroponics. Interesting.
Oh, that was delightful. Anyhow, excuse me.
Yeah.
I'm all right. When we got back to Guam, there were 3 flights in our squadron, A, B, and C. As soon as the strip on Iwo Jima had been secured, B flight was moved to Iwo Jima to do surface target weather recon. And so as soon as the Okinawa airstrip was secure, B flight moved to Okinawa, and A flight, our flight, moved to Iwo Jima. So we went to Iwo Jima in July of 45 and flew a target surface weather recon there. The first mission that we flew up to the island, the main island of Japan, we were always briefed the night before on where the targets were so that we could go in. So the first mission we flew, everybody was nervous. We'd never been to Japan before. And I was as busy as I could be, just plotting wind direction, and the meteorologist was working his tail off trying to get all of the information that we could send back for the B-29 briefings at 5:30 in the morning.
Huh.
And the tail gunner said, "There's an airplane with a landing light that's following us." And so I didn't pay much attention to it. He said, it keeps following us, keeps following us. Every time we turn, it turns. And finally, I had completed my wind plotting, and I stood up the astrodome and looked up, and there was Saturn, the evening star Venus.
Evening star Venus.
And
Really?
I said, he's not going to shoot us.
Oh, my gosh.
So
You talk about Venus being mistaken all the time for
an airplane with
unidentified
landing
objects and
light.
airplanes, stuff like that. That's very interesting.
But a couple of missions later, we were generally briefed to go into the Tokyo area. A couple of missions later, we were briefed to go in sort of west and south of Hiroshima. So we went there and we made our run from south of Hiroshima on the way up to some of the target areas which were to the east of Tokyo. When we got back, to Iwo the next morning, we heard that the atomic bomb had been dropped. So my crew flew the surface weather recon for the first atomic bomb.
And you didn't know it at the time.
Did not know it at the time, but then we were scheduled to fly the fourth day, but the plane on the third day developed into trouble, so we were moved up. And this time we were briefed to go to Nagasaki. Now, we had never been in the Nagasaki area at all. So we did go up and send back the weather to Nagasaki. And when we got back to Iwo, we found that the second atomic bomb.
That's
so
amazing.
my crew had flown the surface weather recon for both the atomic bombs.
Huh. You think that had something to do with you meeting that major general and you being such a detailed person back then?
I think so. I got a lot of respect from the crew. When we were taking our ship overseas on the flight from Sacramento to Honolulu, when we were about 20 feet above the landing strip at Honolulu, a engine went out on, and of course the aircraft lost lift. It had a modified Davis wing. You had to be going at least 60 knots before there was any lift at all on the wing. Mm-hmm. But when that engine went out, our airspeed dropped quickly, and we fell to 20 feet and just hit with a boom. But they checked everything, and everything seemed to be all right. But the next morning, the radio operator, Chuck, said the first leg of our trip overseas was from Honolulu to Johnson Island, and it was only about 600 miles. So he said, I've been wanting to use the radio compass. Let me do the navigation from Oahu to Johnson Island. I said, sure, go ahead. So I gave him a heading, and then I just went and sat down, and I didn't look at anything on the instrument thing. And he did the navigation from Oahu to Johnson Island. So we got there right on time and right on his ETA. And he was well pleased because he had been wanting to do some radio navigation, and he got his chance. Huh. But I had never looked at the compass during the entire time, and that was a almost fatal mistake. The next leg of the trip was from Johnson Island to Kwajalein. So we took off heading for Kwajalein. I had never done what they call a noonday fix before. I had studied it in school, but had never done the noonday fix. But I decided, well, this is my chance to do a noonday fix. So I got my sextant, climbed up into the Astrodome, shot the moon. I shot the sun 30 minutes before noon, shot it at noon, and then 30 minutes after noon. And I had 3 lines of position. I plotted those 3 lines of position, and it showed me 130 miles north of course. So I checked my figures, everything checked all right. And so I corrected it for that 140 miles and then headed on out to Kwajalein. When we got to where we were within 100 miles of Kwajalein, I asked the radar operator, we had an APQ-13 radar in the back Bombay. It had a 100-mile sweep on it. I said, lower the radar dome and see if you can pick up the atoll. So he lowered the dome, and he said, yeah, there it is, a little under 100 miles away. So I told the pilot, I said, you can let down now. We're approaching the Kwajalein. And as we came down, we looked down at Kwajalein, and there was an airstrip, and there were a lot of airplanes, and there were people running to the airplanes. But if we looked a little closer, there were big round circles on the airplanes. It was Wochi Atoll, which was 140 miles north of Kwajalein. So we
Japanese zeros.
We got out. Yeah, they were zeros, and they were running to get in the airplanes. We got out of that real fast. So the crew was completely lost confidence in me, and they said, well, I don't know what we're going to do now. And I said, well, wait a minute. Obviously, there's something wrong with the compass. This compass was a fluxgate compass, and it was mounted in the wing of the B-24. And so what had happened when we dropped that 20 feet at Oahu, the flux gate compass had been jarred loose, and it was 17 degrees out of true north, and that had been caused a problem. But I said, now wait a minute, I have an astral compass, and it uses the sun to give us a heading. I can use the sun, and we will take the astral compass from Kwajalein to Guam. Finally convinced the crew, and so they let us go, and I was using the astral compass to navigate from Kwajalein to Guam. And I hit Guam right in the middle of the island and exactly on my ATA.
All right.
So the crew had the confidence.
They got
right
confidence back. That's something else there. That's we're talking with W.O. Brown, talking about his service to our country in World War II. And so fascinating. You can see this 100-year-old man is so lucid, so many memories. Marty, would you mind zooming in just a little bit so we can see more of W.O.? Zoom in off my shoulder there. I wish we could block me out, but we just
blocked you out.
Yeah, block me out there. And anybody has any questions? There you go.
And now I'm all alone.
Yeah, we'll give you all alone there for a little bit there. How did you feel when World War II ended?
Well,
Big Victory Day, June 6th, right?
that's another interesting story. We were the only Allied plane in the air when World War II ended. We had been briefed for a longer mission, so we decided to get an 8:30 takeoff from Iwo Jima. So we got an 8:30 takeoff, and at about 10:30, the Japanese surrendered. So we were into the mission when the Japanese surrendered, but when we went to battle stations, the radio operator, who's sitting fairly close to me in the cabin of the B-24, tapped me on the shoulder and said, Lieutenant, the war is over. I said, what the heck are you talking about? He said, if you don't believe me, tune your liaison radio to Radio Chongqing. So we turned to Chongqing, and sure enough, the announcement was the Japanese have unconditionally surrendered. The war is over. And I said, navigator crew, switch to liaison radio, Chongqing. The war's over, the war's over. And they said, shut up.
You drove us over those Japanese islands.
But all of a sudden, we were over Nagoya just about that time, and the airstrip was lit up at Nagoya. We had been flying over Japan for weeks and had never seen a light anywhere in Japan. Their blackouts were
Oh, wow,
total.
yes, of course.
And all of a sudden, there was the Nagoya airstrip, full landing lights on. So I said, it's got to be true. And the pilot said, let's land and accept the surrender personally. I said, you got to be good. Let's get back. So we headed back to Iwo. And when we got pretty close to Iwo, generally we called the tower and said, we're coming in, clear the runway. And no answer at the tower. So we kept calling, and no answer. When we got back to Iwo, the ground crew generally met us with a Jeep that had followed me and would take us to our revetment, and there was nobody there. Everybody was drunk. They were sleeping off the end of the war. So we just landed, taxied to the nearest revetment, and went down and had our powdered eggs for breakfast.
Oh, wow.
But that was the end of the war for us.
Well, we're going to talk about you getting into the space business, and I guess a good segue to that is Wernher von Braun and your story in there. We're going to get into a couple stories here about von Braun. You were at the scene of Apollo 1, but before, I know we got to get then the Cuban Missile Crisis, yeah.
Okay.
So we need to talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis now, right?
Well, you want to talk about von Braun?
Yeah. How you got into that?
Excuse me. Chrysler had been the prime contractor for the Jupiter. They had actually been the prime contractor for the Redstone Arsenal, for the Redstone missile from Redstone Arsenal, and they had been the prime contractor for the Jupiter missiles. So we had I had the logistics for the Jupiter missiles. I had the Jupiter warehouses and controlled all the logistics for the Jupiter missile. So we had done that. And so one of my engineers had been having trouble with the guidance platform. The guidance platform for the Jupiter missile and also for the first flight of the Apollo Saturn 1Bs was an ST-90, a stable table 90, and we had been having a little gyro procession, and one of my engineers was trying to figure out how we could compensate for the gyro procession. So I said, well, let's go up and talk to the guy that built the gyro tables there. One of von Braun's engineers was sitting in the office right across from his office, and he was the guy that had developed the guidance platform. So I took the engineer up and then told him to go in and talk to the guy that had done the development. And so I was standing in the hall, and Dr. von Braun came out of the office, and he grabbed my badge, and he looked at it, and he said, "Is it Chrysler mit Brown or Brown mit Chrysler?" Terrible accent. He's the smartest man I ever knew, but he had a terrible accent. And I said, "It's Brown with Chrysler." He said, "Good, good." And he walked over to his office. I found out later that his name was Brown, and his brother worked for Chrysler.
Oh.
So that was my first encounter with Dr. von Braun. Later on, when I became Chrysler's chief engineer, I had to make the Chrysler presentations both at the Launch Readiness Review and the Flight Readiness Review. The Launch Readiness Review was held by Dr. Debus at KSC, and the Launch Readiness Review was held by Dr. von Braun at Marshall. So I was always making a presentation to him at Marshall.
How should history judge these two titans of our early rocket?
I was in awe with von Braun. I had never met a smarter man in my life. On one of the missions, one of the prime objectives of the mission was to visualize, to actually see how the liquid hydrogen on the S2 stage would, because it floated in big globs in space, how it would be forced down when there was a little acceleration to cover the intakes of the engines. And there were two measurements. There was a camera which was mounted in the S2 stage, and there was also a measurement. So the countdown was proceeding as normal, and finally the engineer called and said, "I'm calling a hold because I've lost the camera." Von Braun came on the internet and he said, "Is not measurement so and so and so and so the backup for the camera?" "Yes, sir, Dr. Von Braun." "Do you have measurements so and so and so and so?" "Yes, sir." He said, "Then we launch." And we launched. Fortunately, the camera did come back on during the mission, and we were able to see the hydrogen when the thrusters were fired. The hydrogen immediately settled down around the engine air tank.
Ullage motors, right?
Yeah.
Ullage motors, is that what was used to move that?
Yeah, so.
Huh.
But that's the kind of guy he was, and everybody was in awe because he was up on every detail. And
he was a large man too, right?
Yeah, and
he was 6'1", so he was
very imposing character.
Taller than you, right? Was he 6'3" or something?
Yeah, I was 6'1" and a quarter.
Okay.
So
how about Debus?
Debus was the perfect picture of a German aristocrat. He had the saber scars on his face from in college. You know, they fought with real swords.
Oh, really? That's why he got a scar from college.
Yeah. That was a badge of honor for him, and he was a sharp guy. He was head of the missile firing laboratory, which was the predecessor of Kennedy Space Center. And he was a thorough man. Mm-hmm. If there was ever an anomaly, he wanted to know what happened, how you discovered it, how you fixed it, what you did to prove that it would never happen again. And he extremely thorough. I remember one time we had a lightning strike on the pad, and we had run tests to determine what had happened, if we'd had any damage at all. And one thing that we had damage was a cable junction box. The cables were normally only about 70 feet long, so in order to run from the launch pad back to the blockhouse, they had what they call cable junction boxes. And on this cable junction box, I found two shorts. So I got to piddling around with them and trying to decide what had happened. And finally, it occurred to me that there was excess solder on the pins of the cable junction box. So we had done a few simulated lightning strikes at Redstone Arsenal on the Jupiter missile. And so I knew, I surmised what had probably happened is that there were minute differences in resistance on those particular pans. And what had happened is the surge from the lightning strike, that minute difference in resistance had caused the solder to melt, and it had run to the adjacent pin. So I went all through the rigmarole, how I'd worked at that, and I talked to Dr. Davis, and he looked at me and he said, "Mr. Brown, what would you have done if you could not have blamed the lightning?" So I said, "I guess I had to make something up." He just roared. I later found out that he had written his doctor's thesis on the effects of lightning, and he knew exactly what I was talking about. So that worked out real well.
Did you see him outside of work or anything like that? It's just fun to.
No.
I got one of the other interesting people is General Medeiros. Do you remember anything about General Medeiros? Was always in the blockhouse.
Yeah, always
he
in the
became an Episcopal priest later on.
And a perfect example of a general. He walked and carried himself as a general should walk and carry himself. So, yeah.
Well, we're going to tell, you've told this story before, and I want you all to hear this amazing story Mr. Brown's going to tell about his role in the Cuban Missile Crisis. 1961 it was? Or?
In 1962, a U-2 spy plane made a routine run over Cuba, and they discovered that the Russians were building the launch pads for missiles. So immediately there was a hustle and bustle. The Navy was dispatched to intercept the Russian ships going to Cuba carrying supplies, and everybody was on needles and pins like this is the start of World War III and it's going to be a nuclear war and we'll all be annihilated. But what the public did not know, strictly classified, that we had placed 6 Jupiter missiles in Italy and 3 Jupiter missiles in Turkey, armed with nuclear warheads aimed at Russian targets. So what appeared in the paper was that Kennedy had looked at Khrushchev and that Khrushchev had blinked. But what Kennedy did was say, "Hey, I'll take those missiles out of Italy and Turkey if you'll stop building the one." So that ended the Cuban Missile Crisis right there. But
what was your role on it? It was fascinating.
Well, I had at Huntsville, I had the logistics for the Jupiter program. I had the logistics warehouse and controlled all the Jupiter stuff. So Dick Smith, who was a deputy director at Marshall, immediately grabbed a C-130 and flew over to Italy. And of course, the Russians were there to watch us bulldoze the missiles. So he grabbed the guidance platforms, which were still highly classified, loaded them in the
Okay.
T-130 and brought them back to me. So.
Wow, that's good. We're in the middle of a thunderstorm here. If we go offline, we'll be right back. We might do that. So Marty just handed me a note on that. I've heard a couple good thunder boomers out here behind their green screen here, in there. Well, that is fascinating. I don't think it's well publicized that we had those nuclear warheads
No,
in Turkey and Italy.
Highly classified.
And you were in on that.
Yeah.
And so guidance systems was your thing. And tell us a little bit about, we got just a few pictures here to show here with W.O. Brown, and we know you're all enjoying listening to him tell these stories. If you hadn't seen the beginning of this, he's talking about your service to World War II. But what are we looking at here? I think you might be in that picture there in the left-hand corner with your hands folded behind your back there, W.O.
Maybe. I've seen a lot of pictures of that. My OIS call sign was C3, which was the first stage of the Saturn 1B, CE for Chief Engineer. So.
But we're looking at the which rocket and what's on top of it there. Marty, take our name off of there, if you would, please. That's Explorer 1 and the Juno rocket, right?
Yeah, it's hard for me to see from here, but yeah, I remember Explorer 1. The Juno rocket was a modified Jupiter missile,
Okay.
slightly elongated for more fuel.
Well, this was in, of course, January 1958.
Yeah.
In there. And what was your role in America's first satellite?
Well, I didn't really have a role. Chrysler was the prime contractor for the Saturn 1B first stage, which is really a bunch of Jupiters tied together.
Right.
So when the Jupiter program ended, the construction was not too far along on the first stage of the Saturn 1B. So my boss had gone to Michoud in New Orleans to head up the construction of the vehicle. So he called and said, would you like to come to New Orleans to Michoud and help us build this first stage, or would you rather go to Florida and launch? And I said, that's a no-brainer. I'm going to launch. So I went down very early, and the NASA folks were reluctant to cede any of the operational stuff to anybody but the NASA folks. They had no trust in anybody but their own people. So they didn't know what to do with me. Then they said, well, what we'll do right now is we'll assign you as a staff engineer to Terry Greenfield, who is a design engineering supervisor. So I became a staff engineer for Terry. And Terry said, well, let's see, the first job we have for the Saturn 1B when we launch will be a micrometeoroid experiment where we'll have a 90-foot satellite that has 2 aluminum plates, and we'll be able to determine how much damage could be done by micrometeoroids.
Oh.
So he said, that's your project. You'll follow it from the contractor's thing to KSC and make sure we have everything that the contractor needs at KSC when he gets here. So the contractor for that was in Hagerstown, Maryland, and I started going up for the design reviews and monitoring the construction of the micrometeoroid satellite. And I did that until the Chrysler people started taking over.
Important to know what space was like.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of debris, like, you know.
They were really
I
worried.
didn't think about that kind of pioneering aspect of
Yeah.
having to.
That was one of the most important things to discover, because how are we going to make it up there without getting shot full of micrometeorites?
Yeah. Well, W.O., you told me one of your favorite memorabilia things you have of the many things is your launch launch a control room badge from Apollo 1, the Fateful Fire,
Right.
January 27th, 1967. What do you remember about that? That without we know it was a horrible tragedy
Well,
in there.
I was working the networks panel, and of course the spacecraft was running way behind time. And I'd been on duty for almost 9 hours, and I was really getting tired. So I called one of my engineers, and I said, take over this. I'm going to go in the VIP room. There was a way that you could arrange the seats in the VIP room so you could lie down.
Okay.
So I went into the VIP room and switched the monitor to the spacecraft so I could watch what was going on. And just as I lay down, I saw the monitor of the spacecraft. I saw heat waves coming from the monitor, and I heard, "Mayday, mayday, fire in the spacecraft, fire in the cockpit." And then, poof, the big explosion. So I knew then that we had lost the astronauts. I grabbed the telephone before they could cut it off, because I knew they were going to cut things off. I called my wife and I said, "I may not be home for a day or two. We've had an accident. I'm all right, but there's been an accident at the cave." So that was my experience with 204.
So AS 204,
Yeah.
the badge that you have and own, and boy, that's gone for a lot of money in the
Yeah.
auction world in there.
Yeah.
That's one of the things at the Kennedy Space Center. They've got the badge board up there at the memory of that, and the people's badges in there. And I can see it still haunts you in a way.
Yeah. That cost us almost 2 years in the program, to go through it and do all the fixes that were required, and to try to pinpoint exactly what had happened. And then to go through and to make sure that we no longer had 100% oxygen in the capsule.
So you were responsible for the Saturn 1B for the launch of Apollo 7?
Yeah.
So how'd that feel to rise from these ashes like a phoenix?
Well, the Saturn V was the Apollo 7, so we were out of.
Oh, right, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you've other programs you worked with was, of course, the moon landing in there, and Skylab. You had a role in Skylab 50 years ago today.
Yeah.
The first crew of Skylab landed after 28 days in space. That was a huge deal in 1974.
It was a big deal. That was my...
73, excuse me.
The first Skylab mission was my first as chief engineer for Chrysler. And we had we were supposed to launch about 12 hours after the Saturn rocket had launched, the Saturn V rocket had launched. And I had gone home, and I'd been on duty I was on duty from when anything started until everything was cleaned up. Our logistics guy, Wayne Newton, used to come to me and say, "Mr. Brown, where do you want your cot?" So if the blockhouse was going to be closed for propellants loading, I would have my cot put back behind the racks. But if it wasn't, I'd have it put in a trailer. So anyhow, I had put my cot there. And I had just gone home and laid down, and we had the third shift test conductor was always on duty. And he called me and he said, "Hey, we've got a real problem. The Skylab is in trouble. When it launched, they had one of the restraints break, and one of the power panels has not deployed, and we're in deep trouble." So I said, "Okay." We had already fueled, and we were getting ready to load the locks. We'd already loaded the RP-1, getting ready to load the lock. I said, "Call in the networks, airborne networks people. We got to get those batteries out of the vehicle because they're time critical, sensitive." and call in the propellants people. We've got to start getting the RP-1 out of the vehicle because we're not going to launch for a while. So I went on back and got on the networks panel, and we safed the Saturn 1B at the time, and got everything ready to go, and put everything back in standby, and drain the RP-1 out of the vehicle.
It was a quick 3 years for you, 73, 74, 3 Skylabs, and then, of course, ASTP. Apollo launched the last command module on that 1B.
Yeah, the cosmonauts came back to Kennedy for one of the reunions of the ASTP launch. Tom Sanford, and unfortunately, I look a lot like Tom Sanford.
You kind of do, come to think of it. Yes, same hairstyle.
I was sitting at the luncheon, and he got out and walked out of the room, and the guy came over and asked me to autograph. I said, no, I'm not Tom Sanford. But anyhow, we did get to meet the cosmonauts and have our pictures taken with the cosmonauts at that time.
Well, we've been talking to W.O. Brown for almost an hour here. Catch your breath just a little bit. We're on the home stretch here. Just talk to you a little bit more. You're doing great. What great stories we've heard. I'm surprised at the World War II stories. Just incredible that you shared with us there. Wanted to look at this picture here, and let's just go big there. There's 1861. Okay, that's actually Explorer 2. And then 20 years later, all right, the shuttle era.
The shuttle, yeah.
What do you think about that jump of 2 decades and what the shuttle did in its 30-year legacy?
Well, the advances in instrumentation and propulsion were the amazing things that occurred during that period of time. We got so much better, and then looking at SpaceX today, they have jumped us leaps and bounds. It never occurred to us that we could recover a booster.
Is that right?
No, we never thought about recovering a booster.
Now, it's done 150 times, SpaceX has.
Right. Amazing.
It is amazing. We did think about, though, we thought a whole crewed rocket would take a space plane up. We saw many concepts of that where there was a kind of a ferry truck up there that would be crewed and come back. And of course, people tell me all the time we did return 133 space shuttles safely, orbiters, okay, and the SRBs. But anything strike you as just something that you never thought you'd see in your lifetime?
Never thought I would see it in my lifetime. Never occurred to me.
Okay. But tonight, or the next day or two, we're going to launch this big heavy there, okay? This is the Delta IV, 3 corn silos, basically filled with fuel. That's to go off about 3:15 tonight, somewhere around there, if the weather's correct. And we got our buddy Carlton Bailey's out there getting ready to send us some pictures, and this is Carlton's shot. What a behemoth of a rocket. Did you ever think about strapping on rockets like that?
Yeah, because what we did with the Saturn 1B was just strap the Jupiters together. So that was a technique that
was the first kind of doing that,
proven and worked, and no problem. So,
but when you see this is going to deploy a spy satellite.
Yeah.
Quite a big one, and then they've got one more Delta IV, and then they're segueing to the Vulcan rocket on there. We got a question for Mr. Brown here as we're concluding this wonderful episode with this gentleman that I'm just you just got so many stories. We'll have to have you on again.
Would you like to hear how I first got into the aerospace business?
We certainly would.
Okay.
Marty, go ahead, and then we'll have a question for Marty.
Yeah, we got a question from Dwight Stephen Barnecki. Matter of fact, he's from Germany. Was there any interaction between MOCR and the Carnarvon and Honeysuckle tracking stations regarding data information when it was found that Skylab had problems.
I couldn't hear him.
That what had problems?
Skylab.
Oh, Sky. Was there the MOCR in the data station? Which data station was that?
Carnarvon, which I never heard of, and
Carnarvon.
Honeysuckle.
He's asking when Skylab was launched, the orbital workshop. Was there data that told us that something had gone wrong?
Yeah,
From the overseas radio stations.
The tracking stations immediately, when the solar panel did not deploy, that was the first indication that they were having trouble, and that's when the test conductor called me.
Okay.
And said, "Hey, the Skylab's in deep trouble. We're not gonna launch." So I said, "Let's stand down," and we did.
Cool. Well, thank you, Steve. He's in Cologne, Germany, and we got Hazel Banks is watching. She was a secretary to the Apollo astronauts at the Flight Crew Training Building. Remember that place?
Been there many times.
Yeah. That was a hub, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
I'll bet you know what Hazel looks like then.
Oh, yeah. I have seen her, but it's been years.
Tom UCX, I'm sure you're enjoying this, Tommy. This is Dave Stangy up in Michigan. It's Bill Whiting's up in Michigan. Space Monkeys watching. Cynthia Rossi, great that she's always a faithful watcher. This is Robert Law up in Dundee, Scotland. Do you like that scotch at all?
No.
Do you have a secret to your longevity, like having a jigger of scotch or something?
I have not had a drink in 40 years.
Well, all right. Good for you. God bless you.
Of anything, wine or hard liquor.
We've got Maurice Krozowski's watching. He's in Poland. And Carlton Bailey, he's just down the road at Canaveral Groves. Doug Forrest is in Los Angeles. And Gary Gerald is, we call him a peanut farmer, but Gary's going to bring us tomorrow, Marty, some Vidalia onions, which Gary says is his real family business up there in Collins, Georgia. So we can't wait to see you. Have a safe trip down here, Gary Gerald. We're going to push him around the corner here. He's coming Friday. I got my days mixed up here. So we want to hear about how you got introduced into the space program, sir.
Oh, that's an interesting. I owe my space career to cigarettes.
Oh, my gosh.
The man I replaced was a heavy smoker and worked for Chrysler.
Which was common back in the day. The people today aren't used to all this smoking stuff.
And he went into the hospital at the same time that I applied for a job at Chrysler. And he passed away. So Chrysler was desperate to get me in. And so I had dropped off an application at Chrysler on my way home to Macon, Georgia from where I was working in Texas. And when I got back from vacation, we always spent Thanksgiving in Georgia with my family. When I got back, there was a telegram waiting from Chrysler saying, "We need to talk to you immediately. He had an airplane ticket to Birmingham and rent a car and come up to Huntsville and talk to us." So I went up and interviewed with them. They were sort of reluctant to hire me at first because I was 3 years older than my supervisor. My supervisor was a little leery about whether or not I would take orders from somebody younger than me, but he was an amazing man.
What was his name?
L.H. Yonk. They called him Pat because his birthday was on St. Patrick's Day.
Okay.
He was a remarkable man, one of the youngest B-29 pilots in the 20th Air Force. He had served on Guam when I was on Guam at the time.
That's interesting. You've met a lot of remarkable people in your life.
Oh, goodness, I have met
Of course,
them.
you say Von Braun's at the top of the list, one of them.
Yeah, he was, and Debus, I had a lot of respect for Debus. When the headquarters building was built at KSC, Davis had been operating out of a hangar.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah. He was a hangar S over on the Cape
Okay,
side.
where the astronauts were for a while.
Yeah.
The monkeys.
And the hangars over there were just falling apart. We were in a staff meeting with Davis one day, and one of the engineers pushed his chair back against the wall, and the wall just collapsed. The only thing that held it was the paper that was over the wood paneling. The termites had eaten everything but the paper.
Wallpaper. Huh.
That's an awful situation. But
What did Davis do? What did he say? You remember? He just,
Are you hurt?
are you hurt? Yeah.
Anyhow,
Are you hurt?
the first time he opened up a staff meeting in his new headquarters building when they built it over on the island side, we all were in there, and he walked in and sat down, and a guy in a uniform walked in with a napkin over his arm with a coffee container, and Davis had a cup, and he filled Davis's cup. Walked out. I said, "Wow, really living."
That's good. Those are fascinating stories. Our office manager, Anita Truex, was a nurse, and she drove Dr. Davis to his dialysis treatments there at the end of his life, and just said he was a charming man. And,
He was a charming man.
just always interested in what was going on and asking her questions about stuff going on. So this has been a real pleasure talking to you, sir. It really has. We're going to wind up our little program here with one final thought about the future. As you see something like this, the SpaceX Starship, and I know you probably watched the launch of the whole thing about a month ago. When you look at the technology taking us to things like this, what do you think about, sir, at 100 years old?
Oh, well, it's unbelievable that something that big could be launched. But of course, I watched 4 or 5 of them destroyed.
Yeah, yeah.
And to think that they're bringing that thing to KSC is
Not yet, but
it's sort of scary.
is this the future? Is this like, beyond what the way that we're going to expand humanity off Earth?
Well, I don't think they will ever be able to establish the colonies on Mars that they want to establish. That is a hostile environment.
Absolutely.
And hostile environments generally always win. So I'm a little leery about that. I wouldn't want to be involved in any Mars exploration.
To the young people out there and so forth, and young being like under 40 for me anyway, too, what are they making it look too easy?
They're making it look too easy because almost every step is a hazardous step.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. Well, we've got our anomaly going on, but that's a good point, Marty, to say to wrap this thing up here. WO, we've so enjoyed this. I know everybody's really enjoyed listening to you today. Do you have something you'd like to say that I didn't ask you before about your life or career or the space program?
No, I have one of my earliest memories of riding in a horse and buggy with my Uncle Milton and my Grandma Brown. And I can remember I was probably 3 or 4 years old taking a horse and buggy to church.
Wow. Remember the horse's name?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, you've got a great memory, though. Anyway, so, and today, you've got to be proud of what you did. You helped man go to the moon.
Yes.
That was 50 years ago. You were a youngster back then.
Yeah, well, not really.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying. But do you think Artemis is going to make it to the moon in 2 years?
Oh, yeah. They may slip a little, but eventually they'll accomplish it. The people that are working on the space program are top-notch people, and they are smart, and they know what they're doing, and they're taking the proper precautions, and they're taking every step, one step at a time, and they're going to do what they set out to do. So I don't have any doubts about that.
Wonderful words to end our wonderful program here with Mr. W.O. Brown. My pleasure, sir, in knowing you. I hope we see you many more years, okay?
Well, you don't ever know.
You never know. You never know. So tomorrow we're going to do a Stay Curious about kind of the history of the American Space Museum, give you a little of the background of what's going on. And we're going to have, thank you, Selvin, for helping us today, Selvin Trotter. Going to try to give Marty a couple days off here. And so we're just so grateful that everybody spent their time with us today. There's a little water there for you, W.O. And once again, thank you, sir, for all you've done. A true national treasure that you've seen here on Stay Curious. And we'll get you back again.
Thank you.
If you're up to it on there. So thank you all out there. Until then, I'm Mark Marquette saying we can't wait to see you tomorrow to bridge the space between us.
Okay, looks like we're going to stay live until the computer catches up.
Okay. Well, we'll just kill a little time here as the computer won't let Marty.
I know it's going to quit it at any time.
Yeah, it'll quit at any time. So we'll be like off camera here. Can have our IT guy Trim in there. But what do you think about cars? How they've evolved? You went from horse and buggy, and look at these computerized cars like Marty's that you brought you in over here.
Amazing. And it's all done with chips.
Yeah, with chips. Yeah, there's not a carburetor to be found anywhere, is there? Except in those old cars. What do you think about the greening of society, wanting to go to all electricity, away from gas power and petroleum-based?
It's unbelievable. The green energy is a myth. We will never be able to go complete green energy. The best energy at the present time would be gas.
Mm-hmm.
But
Natural gas.
yeah, if we could start fracking again and become energy independent, we'll be stepping a huge step toward green energy. We'll never have completely green energy because we use so much electricity, but we could take a huge step forward if we can go back to energy independence in this country. That's really what we need.